everyone, and welcome to Mindful Chats with Nicole Glassman. I'm your host, Nicole, and owner of Mindful Health, a holistic health practice in New York City, and the creator of the Mindful Health Signature Retreat programs. On this podcast, you'll hear authentic conversations with like-minded individuals, practical tools for spiritual connection, and insights into holistic wellness. We'll explore topics like the 7 chakras, tools to connect to your spiritual self, food as medicine, healing your gut, natural stress management tools, metabolic health, and hormonal healing, as well as finding your purpose, using your voice, creating community, and healthy relationships. This podcast will inspire you to use the tools you already have to live from a place of health, passion, and purpose. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Mindful Chats. I am your host, Nicole, and I decided to rerun my interview with Paula Rastrick because I am working on a new certification that has been amazing and intense all at once, and I can't wait to share even more about it with you all very, very soon. But in the interim, I thought that this interview with Paula was just so fascinating and a really loved show that's just worth hearing again or for the first time. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed or stuck in your head or like talk therapy just wasn't enough, then this is definitely the conversation for you. And if you are feeling like you are constantly on edge or you're shut down, exhausted, emotionally reactive, yet you're doing, and I put this in quotes, everything right, then please check out my Total Reset and Nervous System Reset programs because healing is never just about one thing, and I'm also here to support you. And if you mention the podcast Mindful Chats, you'll receive 10% off the programs. So enjoy how to regulate your nervous system, and if you have comments or questions, feel free to reach out. Have a beautiful day. Welcome to the show, Paula.
Hello. Hi, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you. So what initially drew you to the wellness industry?
I've been in the wellness industry in health for about 20 years since I started training, first of all, through yoga, because that was something that I found extremely beneficial after I had postnatal depression. And then I spent many years working in professional sport. And I've been integrating the science of the brain and the body through performance and also pain. So I started to make complex links between how the brain and body communicate to each other. And it's just kind of gone from there, really. Many years doing that. And then I reached perimenopause when I was 45. And I had a real struggle. I had a real battle. And once I recovered, I started to think, there's some connections here. There's connections. Why did I struggle with my periods? Why did I struggle with postnatal anxiety and depression? And why did I struggle at perimenopause? And I began a very complex journey of looking at the research from trauma, psychiatry, the nervous system, and I started to join it all up and map it all out. And that's basically what my book is about. It's about a new map, a new understanding of why some women struggle more with hormonal changes.
And what kinds of things are you, like as examples, were you finding out?
Yeah, so when I first started to look, based on my own story, I knew there was already research in what's called adverse childhood experiences and trauma. So I had a very complex background. The way I see things now is that my childhood, which was complex, I believe my parents crossed into what we call now neurodivergence, and it was unrecognized, and a lack of emotional support, and also a lot of emotional dysregulation. And I started to look at how the nervous system is shaped, starting from, when I was in my mum's womb. And then I started to look at genetics, and then I started to trace epigenetics, and I started to join up the nervous system. And my conclusion is that women that struggle more with hormonal changes have a more sensitive nervous system, and that crosses over what I call multiple diagnostic standard manual diagnoses, which is things like ADHD, autism. I'm including highly sensitive people. And then I started to realize this is all crossing over with hormones as well. And I don't think anyone's really realized that, to be honest.
So when you say that, there's obviously like different categories of people and situations and trauma and all of that have shaped their hormonal sensitivity, are you finding that it's also toxins and things like that too? Or are you finding it's more actually like an emotional situation?
Yeah. So where I've looked at, I do believe toxins are a part of it. But for me, it's all based on your childhood. So it starts with your heritable genetics from your parents, and then how that can then have changes in the nervous system based on your childhood, really, and what we call trauma. Although I do believe that we've kind of misread trauma. People think that trauma is one big event. It's basically, things like attachment wounds, attachment disruptions, even things like that are not really noted as trauma, birth trauma. So birthing trauma is something that can dysregulate the nervous system.
When you say like traumatic birth, are you saying that the child who is being born experienced trauma from that, or are you speaking of the mother?
I'm talking about both. So what we've not recognized is that, first of all, traumatic birthing experiences, for example, emergency procedures. When I was born, I was pulled out by forceps, and they don't do that so much now, but pulling babies out, that can have changes to the nervous system. And also then you've got the effects on the mother, and that can lead to potentially postnatal depression, which then leads to potential attachment disruptions. And this is kind of twofold, isn't it? That's not being recognized, that the nervous system is extremely sensitive in your formative years to changes and what we call nervous system dysregulation. A lot of people talk about that, but I kind of go much more into understanding the sort of science of that, really, so that we can start to understand what's happening with women's hormones later when they get to puberty.
It's so interesting. I actually was one of those babies that was pulled out that way too. And I had gone for a cranial sacral therapy 20 years ago or so. And I didn't even know this story actually. And when they were working on me, she was like, I can tell from your cranium that you were pulled out. And then when I spoke to my mom about it, she was like, that's so true. How did they know that? And so it's very interesting how it really, it can show up in so many different modalities too.
Yeah, it does. One of my main arguments in the book is about the medical model and systems and how women are treated very much in parts instead of understanding that this is all connected. When we start to look at how the nervous system develops, and then you start to trace things like chronic pain, autoimmune, you start to look at this, it's all connected to the nervous system. It's a tragedy, really, because the sort of medical system here in the UK just does not realize that at all.
I can guarantee the US isn't either. And what are some common signs that someone might be dysregulated and not even realize it?
I think this is such a new conversation. So if we sort of understand that prior to puberty, you've got sort of 10 years of nervous system development. And when you arrive at puberty, your reproductive hormones, which is when we start our periods and we start our cycles, they're joining in an existing nervous system. So they're starting to join in, and for some girls, this can start with heavier periods, so more period pain, starting to have much more mood swings in your teenage years. And when I started looking at it through my own story, I started to look at, okay, well, I was put on the pill at 15, the hormonal contraceptive pill. And then I started to look at the research, and I started to understand, well, that can dysregulate your nervous system. So we're not understanding putting young girls on the pill in their sensitive teenage years can have long-term effects on the nervous system. And it's things like that that will start to create what I call nervous system dysregulation, which is where you become stuck more in sympathetic tone, so heightened anxiety. And I think we've not realised the science of how hormonal fluctuations are driven by the nervous system. We think it's just the reproductive hormones. And you can go through your life and have problems with your periods and your mood swings like I did, not really realising that it's your nervous system, and the medical system doesn't recognise that. And so when you go to get help, if you do, you're told to be, put on the pill, not realising that can actually make things worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. And I guess if a person is dealing with this, maybe unknowingly, is there something that they would be noticing specifically? So they have the mood swings and all of that when their cycles are coming in and maybe painful periods. It's sad as it is. It's almost an accepted notion at times in a girl's life that, oh yeah, that's normal. You just get cramps when you have your period, or yeah, of course you're going to have mood swings. You have your period. So how can someone, distinguish, okay, this isn't normal. What should they be looking for?
Yeah. You've got what you call PMS, so premenstrual syndrome, which it runs on spectrums. Everything runs on spectrums, and it can increase and decrease throughout life. And then you've got what's called PMDD, and that is the higher end of, unfortunately, mood swings within the cycle. And so I'm just saying that everyone can be on a spectrum of that. But when you're talking about these mood swings within your hormonal cycles, where you can go from very, very high heightened anxiety, and then there's a drop, and you can go into almost suicidal thoughts, moments where it's very dark, and some of the ways that you probably don't notice is your binging eating might increase in certain parts of the cycle. Addictions start to appear, which we don't realize is part of the cycle. And it's not being recognized that these are outside what you would call normal cycles. They are mental health cycles that can be actually really crucifying for a lot of girls and women. So suicidal thoughts, very dark, extreme mood swings, running from, euphoric on top of the world to in the pits of despair. So that real swing.
Yeah. So it's like extremes, like absolute extremes of, any kind of symptoms. Does it change throughout a woman's life? Like when you talked about perimenopause versus, a cycling female.
So it's really, that's why I've done the book, because to lay it out is complex. But what I'll say is that if you start with a trajectory of having worse hormonal symptoms, I'd like you to think about this. Puberty is a major brain and nervous system recalibration. And this is where things may start to show up. And then your second major brain and nervous system recalibration is pregnancy. And then your last one is perimenopause. And what you typically find is that after pregnancy, some women may start to have problems. They might not have had them before. So they might not have had more severe PMS or PMDD, but it can happen after pregnancy because there's been a major shift in the way the brain and nervous system operates. And it's the same with perimenopause. So you might get to perimenopause and you can really crash, which is what happened to me, and I think is happening to a lot of women. And then a lot of women are getting diagnosed with ADHD at this point. But my argument is that nervous system profile was always there. It's an epigenetic trajectory. It's just an unmasking at the final hurdle where the nervous system has become to the point where you have very little stress resilience left. Your nervous system's burnt out. A lot of us have been pushing against our nervous systems for many years. And perimenopause is almost like the reckoning. I don't know if that makes sense, where it all becomes unmasked. But it was always there. It's not something that just appears at perimenopause. And this is where I believe we're not understanding the nervous system. We're kind of just thinking, well, you arrive in midlife and it all crashes here. It started in the womb. It's an accumulative effect based on the way your nervous system has developed, depending on your earlier life. And then to give it a little bit of science, when you get to perimenopause, the first hormone you lose is progesterone. And biologically, progesterone is your stress regulator. So it's your calming hormone. And when you lose that, estrogen is skyrocketing up and down, up and down. This is, and this, because you've got very little stress buffering left, because you've lost your natural progesterone, you have what I call a very, very decreased window of tolerance. And this is where we get the symptoms. And I believe that's nervous system symptoms and not just estrogen symptoms, which is what the medical model likes to tell us.
So it's like, from the traditional perspective, or not even Western medicine, but just the general consensus is treat the hormonal imbalance or treat the deficiency. But you're saying, wait, like underneath all of that, no one's looking at the nervous system.
Yeah. And it's quite controversial because it's going against systems, and it's going against what in the UK, the medical system is telling women that take estrogen and you will be fine. Well, my book's got surveys, it's got case studies. I've interviewed many, many women that have taken hormones and they've ended up worse. And that's what happened to me, you see. And I think we need to understand the individual's nervous system as opposed to kind of standardizing everyone's care, because women are falling through the cracks when it comes to understanding the mood changes and the brain changes that can happen, particularly at perimenopause.
Talked a little bit about your book, but I want to hear more, the brain body method. Can you just explain for everybody, who hasn't heard of it, what you're talking about and how your approach is different from traditional therapy?
I've always integrated my approach. I've always been one for studying and learning and applying integrated methods rather than sticking to one thing. So over the years, as I said, with my experience in pain science, I started to think, well, somatic body work, we now know when it comes to dealing with trauma, we're looking at a physiological response. So instead of it just being talking, we need to address the sort of bottom-up body. But then I feel that the interconnectedness, I do EMDR as well, but I wanted to sort of say, well, look, I think women can benefit from understanding themselves. So parts work. When I started to look at attachment and how the nervous system develops, what we all do is we develop parts of our personalities and our psyche as defense mechanisms. So everything that your personality is constructed from comes from the way you've experienced the world and what's happened to you. So you develop what's called parts of yourself. And you might have parts that are protective. So you shut down or you avoid, or some people go into fight flight more easily because they have what's called, a more firefighting type of personality. And all of these parts are really important to understand because they shape your relationships. So if you're dealing with a partner and their nervous system has developed to be more avoidant or shut down, doesn't want to communicate because of the way that they were brought up, and then you have a nervous system profile which is more empathic and wants to talk and wants to sort it out, you've got two different nervous system profiles here operating from different parts of themselves. And so understanding all of that can really help with your relationships and your understanding of yourself. So I believe that having an integrated approach with multiple blends of brain and body is the way to create more healing and wholeness, especially when it comes to understanding your nervous system and hormones, because it's just not something the medical system are realizing.
In your book, are you helping people to maybe understand what profile they might fit, or and like within that profile, some things that could maybe be helpful for them, or is it something they need to work one-on-one with you to kind of resolve?
No, in the book, what I'm trying to do to help people to understand their own nervous system so they can advocate for themselves. It's not about coming and working with me. It's about me giving you the map to understand your nervous system. It is a complete game changer. Nicole, honestly, I can't tell you, because there's scripts you can take to your doctor. There's understanding of the hormonal issues that you might be facing and why. And then you can go to your doctor and say, look, there's research here I would like to discuss, rather than just being put on antidepressants, or I would like to discuss my nervous system. Do you see what I'm doing? It's about women understanding themselves in order to advocate for themselves. Because if you don't understand your symptoms, you're powerless. You're in the hands of others, aren't you?
Yeah.
And this is where I believe a lot has gone wrong, because we've handed over our bodies to systems, and it's systems that are failing women. The more you understand your system, the more you will be able to help yourself. So that's the approach I'm taking.
I love that. And I think, anytime somebody has a better understanding of what their body is telling them, or, what their emotions are really coming from, then yeah, they're empowered, as you were saying.
Yes. We live in a bit of a quick fix culture, don't we?
100%.
And unfortunately, that's leading to more problems, because I have spoken to women that have gone with that. They've been given hormones. They've had side effects. Then they go back to a doctor, and the doctor doesn't say it's the side effects from hormones. They then give them anti-anxiety medication. Then they've now got that put in the system. Then they've then got other meds put in the system, and it's become very, very messy.
Yeah. And I would imagine, like, with a lot of these situations, people are probably also very sensitive to even any kind of medicines or any changes they put in their body. So it has to be done very carefully.
Yes. And it needs to be understood. I mean, sensitivity, that's what my book's about. It's called Sensitive Women, and it's all around understanding the sensitivity of the nervous system.
And if you were working one-on-one with someone, like, what is a session like around this issue?
So for me, if I was working one-to-one, what I normally do is we start to trace their nervous system profile. So you start from the womb, and you through my book, it goes through the stages. So I'm mapping science. So I will map their nervous system. So there will be a full-on profile of nervous system mapping, first of all, then a match of that nervous system to the science and the research, and then an understanding of, as they've gone through their life, there will be patterns, and it's these patterns that are not being picked up. And then we start looking at the symptoms, and then we start understanding what the body's telling us. And then we start from there. So then I'll introduce things like EMDR or body work and more cognitive work, vagal tone. I do a lot of work around heart rate variability, which again, no one talks about, but that's a scienced, evidence-based way to help regulate the nervous system. So I will then pick and choose based on that client what I think they need.
With the EMDR, it's kind of like, just as an example, you're tracing the nervous system, you're seeing where there are some maybe points of dysregulation or maybe where it originated, and then you're using the EMDR to clear what came up.
Yeah, and it depends on where they're at. So for example, perimenopause tends to be a time that brings up trauma, and you'll have women that it happened to me where trauma resurfaces. So unprocessed trauma. And when we look at the symptoms in perimenopause and we look at the brain regions, for example, if you have heightened anxiety, then we start to look at, well, what's the limbic system telling us? Memory is encoded here that's coming back up, and it's working from the symptoms to then start to lead out into what therapy you would apply. Does that make sense? It's not just a perimenopause symptom.
Sure.
It's a symptom of the limbic system. It's a symptom that the body is holding on to something. So that will guide. I would do EMDR, but not everyone wants to do trauma reprocessing, and you don't have to. That's why what I'm saying. You do not have to go into that. You can work with the nervous system and the body without having to do that. And I think it's really important, because people are put off sometimes with what they think is trauma therapy. I'm going to have to talk about it. You don't have to talk about it to work with the body.
And if someone was working with your book and working on their own, can you just give an example of maybe one or two suggestions that you might give to someone to kind of help their nervous system so they understand the types of techniques you're recommending?
Yeah. The first one, and the one that I would say, is the vagus nerve. So working with the vagus nerve, and you can do that through tracking your heart rate variability. I mean, you can pay a lot of money and you can do it through different apps, but you can quite easily get an app, you can get it on your watch and start tracking your heart rate variability and your vagus nerve. So you start to see with your symptoms when your nervous system is dysregulated. And that's when you then put the interventions in. Most of us haven't got the connection with our bodies. We push through. So a way of tracking when you need to rest, you need recovery, is to track what's called your heart rate variability. And you can do that through, most people now have got Apple Watches, haven't they? Or they've got something. Tracking that will tell you when you need to recover and not push the system. Too many of us are pushing against the system when we should be in recovery. And your heart rate will tell you when you're pushing against the system.
That's so interesting. I love that. It's giving people awareness. So many people accept whatever they're feeling as normal. And
Yes.
You're saying, look, your body has safeguards. You're just ignoring them.
And I think, to be honest with you, we live in a world where we're becoming more and more disconnected from the body and understanding the nervous system. And we are born to survive. I mean, our nervous system is primed for survival. And most of us, not all of us, are living in survival mode as a default setting.
Yeah.
We're not understanding the need for rest and recovery. You've got two forces. You've got go, 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 and then you've got rest, haven't you? We do a lot of go, go, go. And then we wonder why we're depleted and burnt out, because we haven't refilled the cup. We don't have anything left. And perimenopause will do that to you.
That makes so much sense. What kinds of things do you do now that you have all of this information and your wealth of knowledge? What do you do to keep yourself in balance?
I've done quite a lot of things, actually, and it sounds quite wild, but I started to look at relationships. I started to look at the people that I was around, because another thing is that if you can do everything you want, but if you surround yourself with the wrong people, that's just as toxic for the nervous system. And a lot of us have done that, people pleasing, where, we put ourselves last, and it's about putting yourself first. It's about the time where you go, I need to understand me. And that means shedding quite a lot of potentially toxic relationships that you've been involved in. So that's one. But for me personally, I use heart rate variability. I use yoga. I'm a big yoga fan. But I use the Safe and Sound protocol, which is a nervous system regulation tool based on polyvagal theory. So that's something that I integrate into my daily practice. It's music therapy that stimulates the vagus nerve, and that's something that I use personally.
How does that work?
It's quite a new thing. So the way that it works is that music therapy, I mean, people can look at this now. There's quite a lot of research about how certain music can regulate the nervous system through the kind of your sound system, basically. And have you heard of polyvagal theory?
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I just did a show with someone who was talking about this. So only recently have I heard of it. Yes.
Yeah, polyvagal theory is a theory of the nervous system. It's a theory of what we call safety and connection, because ultimately we're all primed for safety, survival, and connection. And the nervous system thrives on safety. It needs to feel safe. And we live in a very unsafe world, and a lot of us don't feel safe, and we don't feel safe in our bodies. So polyvagal theory kind of teaches you about nervous system safety and body literacy. So the more you understand your symptoms and how your body's feeling, the more you understand, I can take back control. And it's based on the premise of the vagus nerve, which is a huge nerve that runs throughout the whole body. It connects your brain and your body through all systems. And it's like a kind of information sort of highway. That's the best way to put it. And you can strengthen that vagus nerve like you would go to the gym and you would strengthen your legs. You can use tools like the Safe and Sound protocol, which is what I'm talking about, which uses auditory sound to work on stimulating the vagus nerve and calming the nervous system down. So bringing it back into more of a parasympathetic state, a safe state. So you're regulating yourself back to safety so that you've got more capacity to deal with everyday stresses, because we live in a very stressful world. So it's around giving yourself more capacity, stretching your nervous system, increasing the strength of the vagus nerve so you can deal with stress more efficiently. A lot of people think, I want to use techniques to calm me down. And that's fine. But if you haven't got the nervous system flexibility or the capacity to deal with stress, no amount of calming down is going to help stretch the window of tolerance. So it's about increasing the capacity for stress. And the vagus nerve, when we look at the research, is now starting to underpin. So low vagal tone. So let's just say a weaker vagus nerve. It'll make things easier for people to understand. Is now being looked at with ADHD, post-traumatic stress, nervous system profiles that need more regulation. That's the easiest way to put it. I believe that is a huge part of the missing puzzle when it comes to women that struggle with hormones and hormone changes as well.
This is so fascinating.
Yeah.
Are the sounds or the tones, the music that you would listen to help to strengthen it and kind of recalibrate it, are they the same for everyone, or is it specific to each person's nervous system? Like they need a certain tone?
No. So the way that the Safe and Sound protocol works, which is a vagus nerve stimulation through auditory, so through the ear, that has a frequency that's been looked at to stimulate the vagus nerve. The music you can change. For example, you can have classical music if you want. You can have sort of pop music if you want. But it's the frequency of the music. It's the undertones of the music. Because when we actually understand the nervous system more, we understand that safety comes first. If your nervous system, in order to thrive in your body, your nervous system has to be able to move out of survival. And when I say survival, what I mean is that sort of heightened sympathetic state, that sort of red zone, I call it, where you're functioning. A lot of women function on what I call high functioning anxiety. It's like that's their home state.
I would imagine, there's a lot of people out there that I know, I've heard it myself, that are like, I can't sit still. I can't meditate. I can't quiet my mind. When they're doing, techniques like this, it must help them be able to meditate or be able to be still.
Exactly. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I like the understanding of the vagus nerve or even HRV training, remember, I'm giving options here. So because everyone's so different, if you've got a very, very busy, hyperactive mind, your mind, your brain, is constantly going. You'll hear a lot of people say, I don't want to meditate. So with the vagus nerve training, you don't need to sit still. You don't need to sit. You can have earphones on and you could, for example, do something like ironing, or you don't want to be interrupted. You want to get into a bit of a flow state. But for people that don't like to sit still, it's a way of calming, getting that nervous system more regulated without this discomfort of having to sit. And then as you start to stretch your nervous system and your window of tolerance, you might find that you are able to sustain more quietness, if that makes sense. So it's a way of expanding your tolerance. It's strengthening your window of tolerance. It's increasing your stress capacity. And women that I work with that struggle with hormone changes have low vagal tone, a very reduced window of stress tolerance. And when hormones fluctuate, the nervous system cannot regulate and they have symptoms, severe mood symptoms, because of that. Can I increase my capacity, my stress capacity, to deal with this? And the answer is yes, you can.
Right. And what you're saying that's so fascinating and so different from what most say is you're not telling everyone, well, just shut it off and go to sleep early or just shut down and meditate. And because, right. This profile of a person is saying, I can't do this. And now what? So.
Yeah. Yes. Because we've been kind of like, so, we sort of think that, right, okay, I've got to calm down. So this is all about calming down. I've got to calm down. Well, the minute you start telling yourself you've got to calm down, you're already pushing yourself outside of your window of tolerance. So when we start to understand it's not about calming down, it's about increasing your capacity. So your nervous system has a wider window of tolerance to be able to deal with stress. We're all women that I speak to are operating on very, very small windows, right? Now they can't calm down because they're in hyper arousal most of the time. So how are you going to come? You can't. It's about expanding the capacity, and then you will start to have windows where you are more regulated. And the more you work on it, like you go to the gym, the stronger you get. The more capacity you have, the more calm you're going to feel, because you've got a bigger, stretchy nervous system, rather than keep saying, I need to calm down.
Yeah, because that's also, people start to criticize themselves too, that I can't calm down. What's wrong with me? And it turns into this whole cycle of many emotions associated with, I know I'm stressed and I don't know what to do. And then they're stressed because they're stressed. And it's just this endless cycle.
And it's not about not being stressed, right? So this is the other thing, isn't it? Because stress is we have tolerable stress. We are designed to perform under stress. So stress is not a bad thing. Unfortunately, if your nervous system has no capacity, it has a very small window of tolerance, and you get stuck in that heightened anxiety, your nervous system is operating in what I call the red zone, and it's higher inflammation because you're constantly in a heightened state. My book explains this, right? So to drop back down into that window of tolerance, you need to be able to have a wider window of tolerance so you can go in and out. So yes, you're going to get stressed, but you're going to have a better braking system that kind of brings you back into your window of tolerance. So you're regulated. Then you've got another stress. You go back out of the way. It's bringing you back and in, as opposed to just staying in heightened stress all of the time. And I think a lot of women live without realizing, I'm one of them, so I'm not criticizing, have lived in that state. And my book explains it, why, from a young age, in more of a survival state.
And how do men fit into this? Like, what do they, I imagine, of course, they have nervous system dysregulation too. Do they experience it in different ways?
No. So my next project is about men. I worked with men for many years, as I said, in professional sport. The nervous system of a man is no different to the nervous system of a woman. I mean, the difference with the woman is that biologically, women have cycles, right? So women have hormonal cycles, don't they? Monthly bleeds, periods. Men don't have that, but they still have the same hormones. They still have estrogen. They still have testosterone. They still have progesterone. We've all got the same hormones. And this is another thing. It's like, men's nervous systems are wired for survival and protection and safety, the same as women's are. And survival comes first. So we are biologically wired first to survive in the environment, and then secondly to reproduce. So we're both doing the same things, but in different ways, because our nervous systems are designed to meet, connect, in order to reproduce. That's how we're wired. So it's the same. And men can just be as affected by their childhoods, but they are masking in a different way to women. I know men that have attachment wounds, and that comes out in relationships, right? So if you have a man that didn't get regulated by his mother, or had a mother that was cold, or punished him for being bad and showing any form of emotion, you're going to have a man that potentially has attachment nervous system issues, and that will play out in his adult relationships, which he doesn't really understand because it's below consciousness. And it's pre-verbal. But trust me, that is how the nervous system, and that's why we need to understand the nervous system. It's mad when you think about it. It is, because when I started looking
It's
at my
like the access
relationships,
point for
I mean, it's a
everything.
whole different subject, but when I started looking back at my relationships and what we like to call trauma bonds, unfinished business that you don't realize you're taking into your relationships. When you start to see it from a nervous system perspective, it really starts to make more sense. And it helps you to consciously start to understand, why am I attracted to this profile? Why have I been drawn to emotionally unavailable men? For example, my dad was higher on the sort of what I call the narcissistic spectrum. And so my life was filled with parenting him and managing his emotions. And then later in life, I was subconsciously drawn to the same patterns, emotionally unavailable men. Does that make sense?
And is it almost because your nervous system like got used
It's
to that
wired.
kind of
Yes.
yeah.
Your nervous system is wired, right? And so now I can see differently. I can see things from a much more of an above conscious, a much more of an awareness, right? But when you haven't got that awareness of the nervous system, you're pulled into nervous system patterns. And you're drawn by the nervous system. You're drawn in by the nervous system. And it doesn't need words. You can meet someone and you can just have this, whoa, what's that? And you don't know what it is. And it feels like this, like a bond or a connection. It's two nervous systems meeting and connecting.
Wow. So it's almost like even in the dysregulation, there's familiarity. So then you end up kind of being attracted
In the
to
chaos.
the chaos. Yeah. So it's wow.
Chaos. Yeah. So it's what you're used to, isn't it? So, for somebody like me who grew up with chaos, safety feels dysregulating, boring, feels boring sometimes, because that's how my system's been wired. It's been wired in that way. And we're not realizing these sort of what I call this kind of subconscious nervous system wiring. And you're wondering why you're playing out patterns. And they are coming from your nervous system development. That's how I see it. And sometimes women, with my type of profile, and again, I look at evolution. I'm looking at ADHD and things from more of an evolutionary standpoint, because we've all got different brains. I mean, that's how we all survived. We needed different brains when we were in the hunter-gatherer tribes, because if you all had the same brain and nervous system, well, you wouldn't leave camp, would you? I mean, you'd just be sick. So you've got women, do you know what I mean? You've got people that are more dopamine driven, because they need to seek new land. They're more adventure seeking. You've got people that are more pattern recognition. You'll have people that are quieter, stay at back. You wouldn't have survived without all of these different brains. And I believe that's what we're looking at here, rather than diagnosis of disorders and things.
I mean, honestly, it's so genuinely fascinating. I could talk to you for like 3 hours because I find this so interesting. I've heard aspects of a lot of this, but not in the way that you explain it. You do such a good job of putting the pieces together.
Yeah, it's a big conversation, a big one. And that's what I'm doing with the book, is to give a map that makes more sense visually for you, because it helps you to join things up and see that perhaps you're not mentally ill, or your symptoms in perimenopause are signs of nervous system dysregulation, not just a simplistic sort of, you need estrogen. I think women need to understand more so that they can take decisions rather than being told you've got a disorder or you've got this, and then getting lost in the systems with multiple diagnoses.
And where can people learn more about you and your offerings, and how they can work with you? Or even, I mean, your book, is it available on Amazon, or where can they find this?
So at the moment, my book is being held back because it's being looked at by scientists. So it's going to be available towards the end of the year. I'm trying to get some medics to look at it as well, so I can get some validation through some medical experts. So towards the end of the year is when it's be available. The best thing to do at the moment is to follow me on Instagram, which is Mrs. Paula Rastrick.
Nice. And so that's not far away, the end of the year.
It won't be long. And I do honestly think that it will hopefully change and give a new map to understand your profile and to help people to understand that we need a nervous system first approach to health.
I love it. Thank you so much for, genuinely, everything you shared. I'm really fascinated, and I know that our audience has probably been very engaged listening to this too, and definitely would want more information. So thank you so much for your time and for all of your knowledge. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
And to all of the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and I wish you all. Thank you so much for listening. I hope today's episode inspired you to live a healthier and more joyful life. Be sure to check out the show notes for any important links or resources mentioned. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, leave a positive review, and share it with a friend. You never know who might need to hear this message. You can also connect with me on Instagram at mindfulhealthnyc. I genuinely would love to hear what resonated with you, and I love connecting with listeners. You can tune in every other Wednesday for another episode of Mindful Chats. I look forward to connecting with you all, and have a beautiful day.